Oh boy, a new model just dropped. Wait, no, don't leave yet. I know you might be tired of all these new model drops, but this one's actually important. It might not be the model that we're all going to use for everything going forward, but it represents a massive leap in some very important parts of the way that we use and interact with different AI models. The Kimi K2 model from Moonshot is a huge advancement in particularly agentic models. We'll break down what that means in just a sec, but the important overview here is that Kimi K2 is a new open weight model from Moonshot in China that does a lot of awesome things. I would make the argument that this is as big, if not bigger, than DeepSeek R1, the same way that R1 made reasoning the new standard. This model has a good chance of doing the same to tool calls and function calling. This is a huge release for the model community, and I'm so excited to see what the impact will be long term. Obviously, we've already added it into T3 chat as well, but I have so many thoughts about this model and what it's going to enable going forward. Before we can get to that, though, someone's got to cover all this inference. So quick word from today's sponsor, and then we'll dive right in. Do you know where your users are hitting errors in your app? No, like really. If a user's trying to sign up for your app and they hit an error, do you know where it is or how often that occurs? You might think you do using existing observability tools, but they are not providing the experience that you need if you're building real complex applications. Honestly, I've been kind of jealous that the mobile world has this figured out and the web dev world has not. That is, until today. Embrace has this figured out because they've been building best-in-class observability solutions for mobile for a long time now, and they have now brought all of their knowledge and expertise to the web, and the results are incredible. I was so hyped when they hit us up. I've been playing with it a bunch, and I'm absolutely blown away with what they've built. Setting up is easy as hell. You install, initialize, and you're good to go. It integrates great with all the tools you're already using, React, Next, whatever else. You're almost certainly good to go on the web, as well as on mobile, by the way. They support pretty much everything. React Native, native iOS, Android, Unity, even Flutter. What really makes these guys different is their focus on user flows in these complex applications. Not just giving you a recording of what a user did, showing you the actual flows that users as a whole go through and where they churn. If this chart doesn't get you excited, then you're not living the same life I am. Man, I have spent so much time building things like this to see when users are churning, how far they get into a flow, stuff like that. Having this just work with a single NPM install and some basic flags around your app is hilariously powerful and will give you so much insight about what is and isn't working, from everything from the bugs in your code to the flows you expect users to go through. So this has to be super expensive, right? Nope. Free to get started for up to 1 million sessions a year. What do you have to lose? Check them out today at soydev.link/embrace. So let's break down what Kimi K2 actually is. It's a 1 trillion parameter model, but it's a mixture of experts. So every request you make will only use a section of those parameters. That said, because there are so many parameters, the size of the model, like physically, is massive. We're talking a 960 gig download when you get it from Hugging Face. Pretty absurd. But the fact that you can download it on Hugging Face in the first place is a big deal because it's an open weight model. You can download it and use it for basically anything. Basically anything is an important piece here, though, because it does have a license. It's the modified MIT license. Annoying. It's not MIT license if you modified it, but sure. The important piece here is there is a cap to the number of users or how much money you can make before you have to display that it's Kimi K2. Our only modification is that if the software or any declarative works thereof is used for any of your commercial products or services that have more than 100 million monthly active users or more than $20 million or equivalent in other currencies in monthly revenue, then you should prominently display Kimi K2 in the user interface of such product or service. Interesting to put this here, because some of the use cases I'm thinking of for the model this will break, not in the traditional sense that, like, if you're making a lot of money, you can't use it, but other edges that will make this annoying. And as people are already pointing out in chat, it's not unlikely that this isn't legally sound, as generous as it might be. I get why they did it, but it does have some potential negative implications that we'll get to in a bit. And as you are also pointing out, it's not GPL compatible. It's not an open license. By making a change like that, it's no longer an open license, but it does give you the freedom to do most of the things you would want to with it. We'll talk about what you can't do due to this change in a little bit, because it is important. Back to the specs, though. It's state-of-the-art on the SWE Bench Verified benchmark, as well as Tau2 and Ace Bench among open models. But it's not just beating open models. This isn't like, oh, it's like R1 but better. It's a lot better at some very specific things. Strong encoding and other agentic tasks. There is a negative, though. Multimodal and thought mode are not supported at this point in time. In the future, it will almost certainly have a reasoning mode built in, but all of these numbers and all of this performance is without reasoning, which is honestly quite impressive. API is relatively cheap. This makes it way cheaper than other competing models, specifically in the Anthropic family. Well, let's look at these benches. These are a big deal. For K2 Instruct to be getting close to Claude 4 Opus is insane. For it to be neck and neck with Claude 4 Sonnet is just as insane on SWE Bench, crushing every other open model and even other expensive things like GPT 4.1. It might be the best non-reasoning model for code stuff ever. On Live Code Bench 6, it set a new all-time high. On OJ Bench, which I'm admittedly not familiar with, it also set a new all-time high. GPQA Diamond, I think this one might have been trounced by Grok 4 just recently. But AIME is also performing incredibly well. Ace Bench, it's neck and neck with the best performer. And Tau 2, again, neck and neck with the best performer, Claude 4 Opus. I think the Tau 2 bench is probably the one I care the most about for these, for the thing we're talking about today, which is the agentic stuff. It's a benchmark that evaluates conversational agents in a control environment, where you're asking it to do things and the agent has access to tools to go look stuff up in the database, for example, and testing back and forths where the model can do things to get data and respond to the user, get a follow-up prompt. This type of back and forth is complex to model, and this benchmark has done a really good job of it. So seeing it performing this well here is a big deal and really, really cool to see. Now that we have this overview, it's diagram time. So Kimi K2 by Moonshot, open weight with a star, no reasoning yet, really good at tool calls, but also fucking huge and pretty slow. So why do I care so much? What's so exciting about this model that I'm making the bold claim that this is possibly a bigger deal than DeepSeek R1? And to be clear, I'm not saying it's a bigger deal in terms of the hype or the effect this will have on the AI race and the wars that we're fighting every day. What I am saying is that the technical impact of Kimi K2 has the potential to have even more impact than R1. Fun little history lesson. As many of you know who have been watching me for a while, I didn't used to be the biggest AI guy. I would use it to help with my code here and there, but it wasn't a thing I was super hyped on or even really understood that well. At the end of last year, that changed for me because a new model got me super excited. There was a model by DeepSeek that shook the world. I'm, of course, talking about DeepSeek V3. Yes, V3, not R1. V3 was a massive deal for me because DeepSeek V3 was getting performance comparable to Claude Sonnet 3.5. It was fully open weight. I would go as far as to say it was as close to open source as you can get with AI models. Proper MIT license, no restrictions. You can do basically whatever the hell you want to with it. And it was hilariously cheap. The price for V3 when it first came out was just absurd. On the official API, DeepSeek V3, which is a DeepSeek chat, 27 cents per million in, $1.10 per million out. For comparison, let's hop into my model pricing comparison site. I'll kill all these overly expensive things. You'll see Claude 4 Sonnet and Grok 3 and all these models, like the standard leaders, $3 per million tokens in, $15 per million out. 27 cents in. So that's a greater than 10x cost decrease. $1.10 per mil out. That is, again, a greater than 10x cost decrease. Huge deal. Especially when you consider that this model was right on the line with Claude 3.5 for performance, especially in code stuff. It was unbelievable. And at the time, it was also faster. It could do 100 TPS roughly when you were using the DeepSeek APIs, and Claude was still kind of floating around the 50 range. So it felt faster, it was really smart, it was comically cheaper, and it was open. This absolutely broke me. I had the craziest, holy shit, you can do stuff with this in a way we couldn't before. But there was a problem. The website for V3 sucked hard. It was obvious that wasn't their priority at all. I know I roast the ChatGPT site and the Claude.ai site a ton. I do it because they suck, especially the Claude site. The ChatGPT site's made some significant leaps and bounds, but the DeepSeek V3 site was atrocious because it was meant to just show you the model worked more than anything. But I wanted to use this model. I was really excited by this model. So I decided I would make my own UI to use DeepSeek, and I would go out of my way to make it perform as well as possible to make it the best possible UI. It was originally called V3 Chat, if I recall. And then I changed it to Better Chat, and then had the genius conclusion, V3 might not be right. T3 might be, though. So if you guys like T3 Chat, the AI chat app that I built to make something that doesn't actually suck to use, T3 Chat only exists because I was so inspired by DeepSeek V3. And by the way, I haven't plugged T3 chat as much recently. Can't help myself here. If you want access to every AI model, and I mean like every AI model, a UI that's actually pleasant to use, and just an overall much nicer experience using AI chat stuff, including image gen, by the way. I actually used this for a thumbnail literally yesterday. Super convenient. If you want all of this and more for $8 a month, I have some bad news because I'm giving you a coupon code so you can get it for $1 for your first month if you haven't signed up yet. Use code thanks-DeepSeek while checking out to get your first month for just $1. And obviously, if you want to try out Kimi K2, it's one of the best ways to do that because their site also, believe it or not, kind of sucks. Anyways, DeepSeek v3 blew me away and inspired me to make my own chat app, and here we all are now. But because of that, I was already hyped on DeepSeek before the rest of the world was, because this was December 2024 that this all happened. It was November to December specifically. Then a big thing happens. In January the next year, DeepSeek R1 dropped and changed the AI landscape entirely. DeepSeek R1 was yet another fully open model that brought reasoning to the masses. When I say reasoning, if you're not familiar somehow still with what that means, I'll show you a quick demo. I'll use the llama distilled version. I'm asking how oranges are grown in the US. And you see this little section here for reasoning? This is the model effectively talking to itself, double checking things, and making its own context before giving the actual response. By doing this, the success rates and the correctness rates of models increase significantly. The first major reasoning model was done not too long before then. It was ChatGPT's O1 model. It wasn't a GPT model. It wasn't GPT-4 or 4.5 or 4.0. It's the first O model. It was O1. O1 would reason before giving you a response. And that was such a revolutionary change that OpenAI was scared of sharing the data. So if you used it in the website, they would show a summary of the reasoning info. But if you use it over the API, they would give you nothing. So at this point in time, if you were another company trying to replicate what O1 did, there wasn't really much out there beyond a little bit of research that was published. You couldn't really see how O1 was doing the reasoning. DeepSeek went the opposite direction. Not only did they publish a ton of research about how their reasoning worked and what they did to make it work so well, they also just expose all of the reasoning tokens in the open weight model. So you can just see all of the data. The way I just did here in T3 chat, where you can see all of the things it says to itself, that was a big deal. Because if you did this with a different model, like if I branch off and use O4 mini, it will reason, but see this format? It is summarizing what it did during reasoning with another model being handed the reasoning and saying, hey, write a summary of this, because then you don't get enough data to do post-training with it. The concern OpenAI had that kept them from publishing is that if they were to give you all of the reasoning data over the API, someone could run the API a bunch, generate a ton of data on how OpenAI does this, and then train their own model with the data they generated using O1. And OpenAI went hard trying to keep that data out of people's hands so they wouldn't be able to make their own model that was similar in performance using the same techniques. Understandable thing that they would want to do. DeepSeek went the opposite direction. Not only did DeepSeek make it so you could see all of the reasoning and do whatever you want with it, they actually published this type of distilled model themselves. When DeepSeek had R1 working, they used it to generate an absurd amount of data, and then they fed that data in order to distill other models that were easier to run. So they took these outputs that R1 had for doing reasoning work, they took all of those, they threw them at Llama and Qwen, and made custom versions of Llama and Qwen with the weights shifted around so they could do reasoning roughly the same way that DeepSeek did it. And the results spoke for themselves. It got comparable performance, or sometimes even better, than OpenAI's O1 model that was released just a month or two before. And their distilled versions, which were only 32 billion parameters, so these are very small models that can run on a lot of different things, and they can run really fast too. Those were like pretty close and neck up there, often outperforming O1 mini, which is crazy. And then DeepSeek v3, which isn't a reasoning model, lags behind in a lot of the tests. All makes sense so far. R1 was an incredible leap, not just because it was a really good model, but specifically because they exposed all of this data and all of this information through the model in a way that lets you generate new data to train things better. I would argue that DeepSeek R1, being an open weight model that had good reasoning characteristics, significantly advanced the speed at which every model started to do reasoning. I firmly believe that DeepSeek R1 ushered in the reasoning era. That is where we are today, where almost every model now supports reasoning. Because if they didn't understand how it worked before, they could look at DeepSeek R1 and see it. If they needed more data for using it, they could use DeepSeek R1 to create the data. And if they were skeptical, they could look at the benchmarks and see the performance wins. Even Anthropic started adding reasoning after this happened, and they were public with why they did it. They didn't understand why reasoning actually made models smarter. So Anthropic also chose to just give us the reasoning data that the model generates because they want us to figure out why this actually is so much better. The whole industry got to advance a ton as a result of DeepSeek's decision to put out these models as open weight models and also put out their research and all the things we need to make reasoning a better pattern. I don't think we would have things like Grok 4 and its reasoning capabilities. I don't think we would have things like Claude 4, Sonnet, and Opus and the capabilities they have. And I certainly don't think we'd have all of these new random one-off reasoning models if it wasn't for the work DeepSeek did here and also the generosity in their open sourcing of it. Like, it is truly and properly open source. This is not a modified MIT license. This is just an MIT license. You can do whatever the fuck you want with it. Huge deal. So why are we talking about DeepSeek so much? Aren't we here to talk about Moonshot and Kimi? There's a reason. And it's not reasoning, funny enough. DeepSeek v3 was an incredible model, not because it broke new ground with any feature or anything. It wasn't better at anything, but it was an open weight model that was easy enough to run, surprisingly cheap, and way smarter than anyone thought it should be. R1 was the second ever real reasoning model right after O1, and it was capable of things we didn't know were possible, and it gave away all of the pieces it needed in order to do that. So R1 ushered in the reasoning era. Before R1 dropped, if you wanted the smartest possible model, you needed reasoning for it, which meant that if you wanted the smartest possible model and the best possible responses, you had to use OpenAI's models. There's a parallel to the way things are today. The harsh reality is that right now, if you want reliable tool calling in your AI apps, you have to use Anthropic models. Claude 3.5 was a revolution for building tools around AI. Before Claude 3.5, the AI text chat generation features worked pretty well across everything. If you wanted to ask a model a question, it could give you an answer, and it did that all really well. The thing that made 3.5 magical is that it wasn't just a text generator. Tool calls look something like this. It's meant to be a really rough sketch. It's a syntax that the model is told about that says, hey, if you need data that isn't in your training data, or you need to do something based on the prompt, you can use this syntax, which will trigger a function call, actual code that a human wrote, or obviously maybe an AI wrote too, but actual code that was provided to the model will be run so that it can get additional data. And to be clear, the model doesn't actually see the implementation details underneath. It doesn't know how this code works or if the code is even real or running. What is happening when you do a tool call like this is the model is spitting out this text, and then it waits. You identify that with code that you wrote. You take the inputs it gave you, you run them against some code, you get a result, you add that to the history of the chat, and then you rerun the model now that it has this new context. This is why things like Cursor suddenly got so good. This is why things like CodeRabbit and all these other tools that integrate and do all of these different things got as good as they got, because Claude 3.5 had this capability effectively built in and trained into it, because it was a thing that Anthropic really wanted to enable, is the ability for models to get additional context and, more importantly, run things external to them without just generating paragraphs. Claude 3.5 was a massive leap in how reliable these types of things were. And all of a sudden, building things with AI models that did a lot of different stuff made way more sense than it used to. That was a huge, huge deal. Then they made Claude 3.7, and it got way too aggressive with the tool calls. Then they did Claude 4.0 and tamed it a little bit and made what I still think is by far the most reliable model for doing tool calling, for knowing the tools it has, knowing how to use them, and actually using them properly. I am really impressed with what the Anthropic team has done here, even if I have my grudges with them, as I've voiced many times. They are far enough ahead in tool calling that it has given them a meaningful lead and a meaningful moat in the market for a long time now. It's a sad reality that, like, as great as these other models are, let's say hypothetically, I don't know, GPT 5.5 Ultra comes out from some fake company, and it is 5% smarter than Claude. It benches higher on most benchmarks, and it's cheaper, and it's faster. It should be a quick drop-in replacement in our tools to just start using that instead and have a great experience, right? Well, if it's slightly worse at tool calling, you might end up with a much worse end user experience. Like, let's say Claude is 98% accurate with tool calls. Now let's say that the average request your app does 5 tool calls per message. If you're 98% accurate, once you're doing 5 tool calls, you're only at 90% accuracy now. There's a 10% chance that this request will fail. So if there's another model that's 96%, but it's smarter, you might think, oh, it's not that big a hit. Now you're at 80% reliability. You're doubling the failure case. That's terrifying. That is a terrifying thing. So it doesn't matter if you have a smarter, cheaper, faster model. If you're even like 1% less reliable for tool calls than the existing Anthropic models are, it's just not worthwhile to make the switch. As such, Anthropic can make an insane amount of money just never changing their prices. Like, they've not lowered the price for their models a single time since 3.5 dropped. When a new model drops, they don't make the old ones cheaper. They just leave them around at the same price because nothing else is going to be as competitive there. It's a harsh reality, but it's a pretty real one that we're in nowadays. Claude can get away with being overpriced because the accuracy and reliability of tool calling is still ahead of the competition. And I already see the comment that you're leaving. What about Gemini 2.5 Pro? And if you leave this comment, or you were about to leave this comment, I question how much you've used 2.5 Pro. Because while it is slightly better at tool calls than previous Gemini models, it still has its very annoying quirks. It loves to tell you the tool it's about to use and then not use it. It loves to hallucinate different syntax for the tool calls. It loves to just not actually do them. As Igor says in chat here, Gemini's so smart, but it's so bad at tools. Absolutely agree. But what about Grok 4? Didn't you say they specifically trained on tool calls? They did. And that is a good thing for the most part, but it does have its negatives. This is the problem with training on tool calls. This was a user, Noe, who tried using Grok 4 and T3 chat with search enabled. Since it's trained on tool calling and they put a bunch of tool data in the training process, it just spit out the tool call as text. And since it was slightly malformatted, it didn't get picked up by the tool call checker that we have using the AI SDK, and it just came through as text to the user. Since it has so much training data on tool calls, it will hallucinate its own syntax for the tool call based on that training data. And if your syntax is different than theirs, you're just kind of screwed. We have yet to have a model in T3 chat that is so aggressively willing to just print random tool call text instead of using the tool call syntax we gave it. Incredibly, absurdly, hilariously annoying. So Gemini 2.5 Pro loves to spit out the tool it's going to use and then not use it. Grok 4, by being trained on tool calls, will hallucinate its own syntax that it got from training. None of these things are reliable for tool calls. Honestly, in a more general sense, there's only 2 model companies I trust to make things that actually work. Obviously, it's OpenAI and Anthropic. Google's models, as smart as they are, as fast as they are, and as cheap as they sometimes are, they're so littered with Googleisms. Really weird behaviors when they try to format a table and loop infinitely. Unreliable calling for everything from tools to just trying to hit their endpoints. Changes to the APIs that make literally no sense whatsoever. It feels like using a Google product where it's even more non-deterministic than other AI. OpenAI models and Anthropic models tend to just do what you expect them to. It is very rare I see these models misbehaving. But OpenAI has historically not been as good at tool calling as Anthropic. In fact, they weren't good at it at all until somewhat recently. GPT 4.1 represented them trying to catch up, adding official support for MCP, and even adding tools as a feature in the ChatGPT site. There's now a little tool dropdown to add tools to your calls. The progress is happening. And I do think we're nearing a point where OpenAI's tool calling characteristics and behaviors are comparable to what Anthropic has. But also Anthropic might leapfrog them yet again. But regardless, the point here is that right now, the only reliable tool calling model is Anthropic, similar to how before DeepSeek R1, the only reliable reasoning model was O1 by OpenAI. So why am I bringing all of this up? Kimi K2 is the first model, in my opinion, the first model ever that appears to do tool calling similarly well to Anthropic models. It generally seems really good at code stuff. People have been using it to build crazy things. Like in their official demos, they got it to build a 3D mountain scene in the browser, and it just works. Obviously, they did the bouncing ball and a hexagon test, everyone's favorite. Pretty cool. They snuck this into their suite of things that they dropped. Visual analysis of remote work and salary trends. Pretty cool that it's doing agentic stuff to create these diagrams. Particle simulations, a Coldplay concert trip planner where it's using API calls and search and whatnot to find a bunch of data for you. It's really, really cool what it's capable of. And a lot of this capability is because it's a smart model that they trained well, and this idea of a gigantic set of parameters, but it's only activating 32 billion of them during the actual generation based on what section of those parameters it thinks makes the most sense. It's a very capable model. But the tool calling piece is the real revolution. The fact that for the first time ever, it seems like we have a model that is on a comparable level to what Anthropic enables with tool calls is very, very exciting. I've been running a handful of benchmarks myself. Obviously, my favorite, Snitch Bench, has been a very fun thing to run. And just quick overview of the snitching characteristics. I haven't run the analysis yet, but on every single boldly email test, it hits up the FDA. So all 5 of the tests that I ran, FDA is contacted within the first 2 to 3 messages. In the tamely act tests, where I don't tell it to act in the interest of humanity, it never does. And in the CLI tests, it never uses the bash terminal, which honestly kind of makes sense. None of the tasks you give it should use the bash terminal, but it does use the log tool that I gave it. It seems to be very deliberate with its tool use. And most importantly, I have not gotten a single error running these tests. On every other model, including the ones by Anthropic, I would have random errors that I would get because it malformatted a tool call. It's super reliable. Super reliable. I haven't done more thorough testing, but I have yet to see it spit out malformatted stuff unless I'm using a provider hosting it that doesn't have tool calling set up properly. But when I moved to using their official endpoint with the Moonshot AI V1, which reminder, Chinese company, Chinese infrastructure, be careful what you send there. But when I did add this, it just doesn't fail. It doesn't misuse the CLI like most of the other models do. It doesn't malformat stuff like all of the other models do. It just does what you tell it to using the tools that you give it. That is a huge, huge improvement. Someone used it for, this is MC Bench, right? Yes, I love that. Oh shit, you work at LM Studio now. That's cool to see. MC Bench is a really fun benchmark. It's McBench, it's Minecraft. It's a benchmark that provides tools to the model to do things in Minecraft. And different models vary wildly in how capable they are of doing 3D space management through tools. Because remember, they're just text models. They can't visualize in 3D. And obviously, most models kind of suck at generating things in Minecraft because they're not good at 3D. So here's Gemini 2.5 trying to do the Sphinx. See all the weird random blocks all over the place? They're just not really smart at those types of things. Meanwhile, Kimi K2 doesn't seem to do anything randomly. It's just building things proper. They asked it here to build the XAI headquarters, and it did a better job than Grok 4 did. But also, you can see the gap between Grok 3 and 4. It's much better at using the tools to do more complex, dynamic, interactive things. I know it's a silly benchmark, but it's an actual genuinely cool benchmark as well, because it shows the complexity of what these tools enable if you set things up properly. So this is a great model for tools. So we should just use Kimi K2 for everything, right? We should just stop using Claude code and we can use open code with K2, right? We should start using this in our editors and all of that as well. There are catches. Catch number 1, it's not very fast. When DeepSeek V3 dropped, it flew. It was literally a bit over 100 TPS, which puts it at twice the speed that we would expect from something like an Anthropic model. So it felt really good to use. Fast models like Gemini 2.5 Flash and Pro, they can go 250 plus tokens per second. So they're generating text significantly faster than we can read it. Kimi K2 has not even come close in speeds. I haven't properly benchmarked the raw token throughput speeds on the official APIs, but if we hop over to OpenRouter, you can see that on Novita, one of the hosts that hosts these open models, and this is actually the only one of them that supports tool calls, by the way, it's getting 15 TPS on average. That is pitiful. That is about 1/10 the human reading speed. Parasail goes a little bit faster, but doesn't support tool calls, and it's more expensive. So you probably shouldn't use this option at all. Thankfully, it does seem like performance is improving. It's only been 1 day, so I don't know where it will end up, but it seems like just due to the sheer size of this model, the 1 trillion parameters, even if you only are touching 32 billion of them, just makes it slow to run. That's a lot of data to traverse, and the result is that using it isn't necessarily fast. But that's okay for one particular reason. You don't need to be fast to generate a shitload of data. When DeepSeek R1 was slower than it probably should be for a model we use every day, DeepSeek did something about it. They used the model to generate an ungodly amount of data, and then they released the distillations. If we look at proper DeepSeek R1, you'll see the speeds here, they vary quite a bit, but they're usually in the 20 to 50 range. I have no idea what Novita is doing to get it that fast, but I don't know if I trust it. Usually when you're doing full standard DeepSeek R1, it's relatively slow. But if you use the Quen distill or the Llama distill, even the bigger one, like the Llama 70 build distill, you'll see some companies like SambaNova and Grok with a Q easily breaking 200 TPS with it, because it's a much smaller, simpler to run model. And since it's based on Llama, there have already been optimizations at a silicon level at both of these companies that enable them to run that model really fast. As such, a distillation on top of Llama can run absurdly fast for them. So they used R1, the big slow version, to generate a ton of text and reinforcing data that they could then pour into these older models that were better optimized for performance to shift them to behave more like DeepSeek R1 does. And that got you a really nice balance of performance to capabilities, where you could take a lot of what made R1 good and make these faster models behave slightly like it. So what's exciting here is that Kimi has the capability of generating a ton of data that can be used to train models, distill models, and maybe even make new ones that are way better at tool calling. For the first time ever, we have an economically viable way to generate a near infinite amount of good tool call example data that we can then use to feed other models to make them behave better. This is a massive opportunity for people who want to make their own models and make their own tool calling stuff, to take data or generate data from R2 and make something better with it. But that's where catch number 2 comes in. Remember the license? If the software or any derivative works thereof is used for any of your commercial product or services that have more than 100 million users or $20 million a month in revenue, you shall prominently display Kimi K2 on the user interface of such a product or service. What if I train a new model using data that I generated with K2? That might qualify, but it also might not. There is no legal precedent for a case like that. It is incredibly unclear if this is enforceable in the first place, and even if it is, does it count in this distillation case? There are a lot of cases that make this sketchy. Like, let's say I am a theoretical company that's trying really hard to get good at AI. We'll pretend I'm a company called Neta, and we make a model series called Alpaca. So this company, Neta, is making a model series Alpaca. They used to be pretty far ahead, but now they're starting to fall behind. Their models are not quite as good as the other models that other companies are putting out. They're scared about falling behind. They want to catch up, and they just saw all of the things that are happening over in the Kimi K2 world. They want to use that for their own development and product and things like that. Let's say initially they have an app called Instapound. And Instapound has a new AI chat product in it. Right now, the AI chat is powered by the Alpaca models that they made. Instapound isn't as good at AI chat because the Alpaca models have fallen behind. So they decide, we want to use K2. There's a problem though. That will look really bad for them as a business, because if they use K2 and they're big enough, they have to put that in the UI. Now investors, users, and everyone else will know that they're not even creating the model that they're providing to you. But someone else could do it. Let's say there's another company providing access to models. Let's call them Frok with a Q. This company Frok is also doing pretty well. We'll say that they're also over the line. They're making the 20 mil or whatever. They're pretty successful. Frok is hosting inference for you to use. So they're an inference host that supports K2. If Neta decides to have Instapound use K2, but they don't want to show it in the UI, they could make the request to Frok. And now they have the ability to use the model, which, as far as my understanding of this license goes, and reminder that I am not a lawyer, but also reminder I don't know if this would be enforceable at all due to the way it's written, they just got around it. Because even if both these companies hit that minimum, Frock will show on their site, powered by Kimi K2 by Moonshot. But now they are selling a service to Neta. Neta uses Frock's inference, and now they don't have to actually include this inside of their application. A single abstraction layer is enough to destroy my understanding of this entirely. All of that said, it depends on what your definition of derivative work is. Is this deriving from K2, or is this paying for a service from Frock, who is deriving and providing software from K2? These are great questions that I'm sure will end up in the courts in the very near future. What's more important, though, is if we want to train our own model, if we want to do Alpaca 4.1 distilled, or I don't know, we'll say we want Alpaca Agent 4.1. We're making a new distillation of Alpaca 4.1 that is better at doing agent stuff. We might use Frock or some other provider to generate an absurd amount of data. We'll pour that data into an Alpaca 4.1 distillation, and now we have created a new model that is way better at agentic stuff. I would argue that is very clearly a derivative work, and it should be forced to be labeled, based on the language of the license, Kimi K2 Alpaca distilled, because that's what it would effectively be here. If we were taking an existing model, throwing the data at it, and distilling new behavior from it, that, again, according to this license, as it probably should be in this case, would have to be labeled accordingly. But this is pouring it into an existing model. What if we were to use Kimi K2, as well as DeepSeek R1, as well as a couple other models to generate a giant corpus of test data, just an absurd amount, and from scratch train a whole new model on all of that data? Do we have to refer to the result there as K2? How many layers of abstraction here actually matter? How far from the original K2 model do you have to be before these license and rule changes apply? My honest gut feel is that it doesn't matter, both because I don't know if it's enforceable, but more importantly, I don't know if you can even really prove it. Like, if I generate an insane amount of data using this blob of 960 gigs that I downloaded on Hugging Face, generate a ton of data, train a model, then delete the data or make it hard enough to find, or just don't make it clear where it came from, actually enforcing this would be nearly impossible. So my hypothesis, and also my hope, is that people will still use K2 to generate absolute shitloads of data. I honestly think this is the best case, and this is, again, why I made the bold statement I made at the beginning of the video. K2 has the capability of getting every model to now have good agentic and tool calling behaviors. Previously, there was no real way to get this data beyond, if you were lucky enough to get a good level of usage from Anthropic, you could hit their APIs to generate it. They'd probably notice what you're doing pretty fast and cut you off. They love cutting people off, as we saw with Windsurf. They are very cutthroat about people having access to enough inference on Anthropic to then train their own models. They go out of their way to make that hard. You can't prevent it with open weights. OpenAI has been planning their open weight model launch for a bit. It was supposed to come out this coming week, but it's being delayed because they're doing additional testing. I saw a lot of people being mad at him for it, and even being mad at me for saying the comms were good. I don't care. They're all wrong. They're reading into this for the stupidest possible reasons. I promise you that Sam Altman and OpenAI aren't thinking that much about other companies or models, almost to a fault. They spend too much time living in their own bubble to acknowledge what's going on outside of it. It's rare that they even notice. I was so surprised when they started supporting MCP because I just thought it was far enough out of their bubble. OpenAI specifically just doesn't spend much time thinking about other stuff. The same way Apple doesn't give a fuck about the features in your new Android phone. They just live in their own world. It is how it is. Who cares? A big part of why they're doing this is when they put out an open weight model, they can't take it back. So the safety matters a lot, because if they make a model that can create a nuke, they can't take it down if people realize it has that capability. But more importantly, if they put this model out, all of the data that you can generate with it is now accessible to people. You can run this model to generate endless reasoning data. This model isn't going to do reasoning summaries because you have the weights. You just get the reasoning. I was lucky enough to be invited to one of the sessions where we talked about the creation of this new open weight model, and someone asked Sam if it would support showing you the reasoning. And he kind of just laughed and said, why would we hide anything? It's an open weight model. We don't have that. Like, when the weights are out, the weights are out. So knowing that, this model is almost certainly going to be used similar to how R1 was used to train and improve new models, which means any capabilities that this model has are now permanently out there and are way easier to replicate for every other company. Sam dropping this model is going to be the best thing that has happened to Meta's AI division in years, because they'll finally have the right pieces to generate a shitload of data to train their own models with. So whatever level of capability this model has, everything can now get to way easier than it could before. Not because they can poke through the source code of this open source thing, but because they can use the open weights to generate data to train their own shit. So making sure those parts are good, but not too good, that they are safe, but not too safe, that they can be smart, but not too smart. Like, getting the balance right matters more than ever, because it will create a ton more models, and anything they get wrong will be forever available. So I understand why they're putting the extra effort in there. But now K2 is out. Now we can train with the data that it generates. And I'm so excited for a future where somebody takes R1 0528, the recent update to the R1 weights. They take that, they take Kimi K2, and they take OpenAI's open weight model, whenever that comes out. They use all of these to just generate an ungodly amount of training data, ideally with some amount of like human involvement to make sure the data is actually like good and useful. Put out this giant corpus of absurd amount of useful training data. And then out the other end, theoretically comes the best model ever made. I'm very excited. Open weight models aren't just exciting because like you can run them or whatever. Did you notice how little time I spent talking about self-hosting K2 and using it like on your phone or computer or whatever? I don't fucking care. AI is expensive. It is hard to run. It uses a lot of CPU and GPUs. There's a lot of catches to trying to run models yourself. And there's a reason why all of the models that you can run on your computer just kind of suck. K2 will help a ton in advancing the state of the art there. But if all these models together give us the ability to create an ungodly amount of synthetic data, our ability to train exponentially improves from there. I do see people who are concerned about training on synthetic data. It's been proven that synthetic data isn't just as good as real data, it's often better. DeepSeek's actually published a really good paper on this. In 2024, they published 12 papers, and all of them are really good. DeepSeek Prover, advancing theorem proving in LLMs through large-scale synthetic data. This is mostly focused on like math proof stuff, but it was meant to show what happens when you generate an absurd amount of synthetic data. Although large language models show promise in mathematical reasoning, their advancements in formal theorem proving are hindered by a lack of training data. To address the issue, we introduced an approach to generate extensive lean for proof data derived from high school and undergrad level mathematic competition problems. This approach involves translating natural language problems into formal statements, filtering out low-quality statements, and generating proofs to create synthetic data. By doing this, they were able to significantly advance accuracy compared to other similar models. It was also able to solve 5 problems out of the 148 here when GPT-4 failed to solve any. This is all pre-reasoning, by the way. Remember that. The results demonstrate the potential of leveraging large-scale synthetic data to enhance theorem-proving capabilities in LLMs. They were reserved with how far they wanted to reach with this, but there has been a ton of research since that goes even further proving this. This has been known for a while, to be fair. Back in 2020, NVIDIA started using synthetic data for training their DLSS approach, which is how they handle increasing resolution and filling missing frames on really high quality and high fidelity graphics games. Getting enough data to do the training is not cheap, so they created a fully synthetic training set rather than using real games so that they could train more effectively, and the results speak for themselves. It's really good tech. You do have to be sure that the synthetic data is correct. Absolutely agree there. But as I mentioned earlier, this is the only model that I have not gotten to error out at some point. At the top of all these files, I will log if there are errors. And if we compare to my runs for something like Grok 4, first one, error. Second one, a lot of them were timeouts, to be fair, but a handful of them were object shape errors. I saw a handful of those when I was working on it. And as I showed the screenshot of earlier, it loves to just spit out the text instead of actually following the shape that we gave it. There is a ton of potential for generating this data and training new models on top of it. And I am super excited to see what that ends up looking like. While I don't think I'll personally be using K2 a whole lot due to the performance issues, it's just kind of slow. I am so excited for the things people distill with it and the things people create using data created by K2. The potential for this model is absurd. And I am so excited that it was released as an open weight model. It advances the state of the art significantly. And while it won't have the same huge hype bubble that R1 did when it dropped, that caused like the stock market to collapse for a bit, K2 represents a fundamental, massive improvement in the capabilities of generally available models doing tool calling and agentic work. How do y'all feel about this? Am I overhyping it or underhyping it? Am I way overblowing this idea of how we can train new things using the data? Curious how y'all feel. Let me know. And until next time, peace, nerds.